All right, let's talk about the Federal Reserve. It's probably the most powerful and, let's be honest, least understood financial institution on the entire planet. It's the ultimate guardian of the US dollar, which is really just a global system built on faith. So, what happens when that faith gets shaken to its core? Well, that's what we're going to dig into. So, picture this. It's the fall of 2008. The global financial system is in an absolute freefall. We're talking about a full-on modern-day bank run, but it's happening electronically at the speed of light. The entire economy was literally staring over the edge of a cliff into total collapse. And the scale of this panic? It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. The Fed looked at the numbers and realized that in a single day, $5.5 trillion were about to get yanked out of the system. That's enough to bring the entire global economy to its knees in less than 24 hours, just gone. So while politicians are debating and Congress is moving at its usual glacial pace, the fire is raging. There was really only one institution on Earth with the power and, more importantly, the speed to fight that fire: the Federal Reserve. They basically saw it as, well, nobody else is coming, so it has to be us. And boy, did they step in. Using its kind of magical, unlimited power to create money out of thin air, the Fed started pumping trillions of dollars in loans into all sorts of companies. We're talking an amount that made any government aid look like pocket change. They became the ultimate backstop, the economy's last line of defense. So you gotta ask, right? How did we even get here? How does the one institution that's supposed to keep things stable end up providing over its near total destruction? Well, here's the kicker. 2008 wasn't some one-off mistake. Not even close. Actually, when you look back at their track record, you see this really troubling pattern. The Fed's history is literally punctuated by the exact kinds of crises it was created to stop. Think about it. The Great Depression, the Great Inflation back in the 70s. These were what they themselves called their great mistakes. And this was all long before the 2008 meltdown. Okay, to really get what the Fed does, you have to understand their main tool. It's called monetary policy. The easiest way to think about it is like this giant electronic lever that controls the money supply. By creating digital cash to buy and sell government bonds, the Fed can push interest rates up or down. And by doing that, they're steering the entire economy. And this car analogy is perfect, really. When they lower interest rates, it's like stepping on the gas pedal for the economy. It makes it cheaper to borrow, so people and businesses spend more. But when they raise rates, that's slamming on the brakes. It slows everything down to fight inflation. It sounds simple, right? But the consequences are absolutely massive. So let's talk about their first huge screw-up, the Great Depression. At the absolute worst possible time, when the economy needed a boost, the Fed slammed on the brakes. Hard. They raised interest rates and just stood by as the nation's money supply completely collapsed. It was such a catastrophic error that years later, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke looked back and basically said, yeah, that was us. We did it. All right, mistake number 2. Fast forward to the 60s and 70s. This time, the Fed did the opposite. They caved to political pressure from presidents like Johnson and Nixon and kept their foot on the gas for way too long. They kept rates super low, and what happened? We got runaway inflation that just tore through the economy, cutting the value of the dollar in half. Okay, so this whole history of mistakes, it really sets the stage for the modern era. And that era was pretty much dominated by one guy, Alan Greenspan. His whole philosophy, his way of thinking, would completely reshape the American economy. And, as we'll see, plant the seeds for the massive crisis in 2008. And this is where it gets really ironic. Greenspan was a huge fan of Ayn Rand. He believed in a totally free, unregulated market. He just did not trust government power. And yet, who gets picked to run the government's most powerful economic institution? Him. The guy who hated government control became, for all intents and purposes, the world's chief price fixer for money. You can't make this stuff up. So while he's in charge, Wall Street starts to operate under a new, unwritten rule. They even gave it a nickname, the Greenspan Put. The basic idea was this: no matter how crazy your bets were, no matter how much risk you took, you could relax because the Fed would always show up with a safety net to catch you. This is a textbook example of what economists call moral hazard. I mean, if you know you're going to get bailed out no matter what, why wouldn't you take bigger and bigger risks? And this kicks off a really dangerous cycle. Remember the dot-com bust in the early 2000s? The Fed swooped in, slashed interest rates, and cushioned the fall for the market. And Wall Street learned a very powerful lesson. take massive risks, and you'll get rescued. That very idea that guaranteed bailout is what directly fueled the next, even bigger bubble, the housing market. So after the 2008 crash, everything's in ruins and Greenspan gets hauled in front of Congress, and he makes this absolutely stunning admission. He basically says that his entire worldview, his core belief that big banks would police themselves because it was in their own best interest, was just wrong. He admitted his whole ideology had failed. Now, that huge bailout in 2008, it didn't just save the system, it completely transformed it. The American economy became, in a weird way, more centrally planned than ever before. It was now totally hooked on this new diet of super cheap credit, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. The thing is, by this point, interest rates were already at zero. You can't go lower than that. So the Fed had to invent a new tool. They gave it this fancy name, quantitative easing, or QE. But what it really meant was this. The Fed started digitally printing trillions of dollars to buy up government debt and all that toxic mortgage junk from the banks. It was a massive injection of cash, designed to keep the financial system from flatlining. But you have to wonder, where did all that new money go? This chart, wow, it tells a pretty stark story. From 2000 to 2012, the Fed's policies sent asset prices, like stocks, into the stratosphere. The market just soared. But many people called this an illusion of wealth. Why? Because if you look at the real economy, at actual job creation during that same time, the line is almost flat. The needle barely moved for Main Street. And the consequences of this were just profound. QE made people who already owned assets, stocks, real estate, incredibly wealthy. It blew the wealth gap wide open to levels we haven't seen in a century. It created this whole economy that's now addicted to cheap credit. And at the same time, it just crushed regular savers. You were punished for doing the responsible thing, with interest rates near zero, just watching your savings go nowhere. And this wasn't just some abstract concept on a spreadsheet. For millions of everyday people, people who worked hard, played by the rules, saved their money, it felt like a total betrayal. It's like, I did everything right, and their reward for being responsible was zip, nothing. So, all of this brings us right to today, and to the massive dilemma facing the Fed and really the entire U.S. economy. After decades of this easy money and constant bailouts, we're kind of stuck at a crossroads. And frankly, there are no easy answers here. And this is the really uncomfortable choice on the table. Option 1, we take some short-term pain. That means higher interest rates, maybe even a recession, but the goal is to build a healthier, more stable economy in the long run. Option 2, we just keep the easy money spigot on, fueling more bubbles, and just pray we don't have an even bigger crisis down the road. It's a tough spot to be in. And that really is the trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Can a problem that was created by money for nothing really be solved by, well, more of the same? After 100 years of these wild booms, painful busts, and massive bailouts, the Fed's biggest challenge might just be figuring out how to break a cycle that it helped create. The answer to that question isn't just about the economy, it's going to define the world for the next generation.